Hello, BookTube. My iPad informs me that it's the 8th of January, and that still, by anybody's measure, counts as the beginning of the year. And of course, at the beginning of the year, a lot of people make resolutions. They make New Year's resolutions. It basically boils down to, when you strip away all the self delusion, which is 90% of most New Year's resolutions, it boils down to a resolution to change some aspect of your life from what it is to what you'd like it to be. A lot of people talk about eating healthier. The number one New Year's resolution is to get in shape. Gym memberships skyrocket in the first few weeks of January and then disappear. But a lot of other people, a great number of people, always making some sort of New Year's resolution along the lines of reading more, which I always take encouragement from. It shows me that even in our debased society, and even in American society, which is quite literally teetering on the brink of changing its essential nature from what it was for 215 years to what it will be for the next 1,000 years. Even in such times, such apocalyptic times with Manhattan-sized glaciers calving off into the ocean, people still recognize the value of reading. And I would argue that it's not even utilitarian. I would argue that quite a few of the people around now who are making New Year's resolutions to read more are making those resolutions not out of some schoolbook piety about how reading makes you a better person, but because they remember how much they enjoyed it and they want to do more of it. I understand that completely, and of course, there's no shortage of advice at the beginning of the year on any kind of New Year's resolution. There's no shortage of advice on how to read more, or how to read better, or how to read faster. I want to stress at the beginning of this video, which is a response video to two other videos, that all three of those things are different. Reading more is not necessarily reading better, and making more time for reading doesn't necessarily mean reading more books. But two booktubers who I subscribe to and watch, one is CriminOlly. It was a brand new subscription to me, and a lot of you will know him for two things: the broader internet, the broader ecosystem of YouTube knows him because he's made a handful of really good Kindle videos about his Kindle, his experience with them, the details of them, how to use them, the upgrading from one kind of Paperwhite to another, or from the Oasis to the Paperwhite, the new Paperwhite. Any of you who have made tech-related videos like that will know that the viewership just skyrockets on them. And that is because the tech world of YouTube is enormously bigger than the book world. Every community on YouTube is bigger than the book world. And the people in a position of wanting to know a little bit more about this item before they sink $50 on it will look around for videos, and that causes viewership to go up. Sarah at the Bookish Knitter has experienced the same thing. She can make a month full of terrific videos talking about her books and her satanic cats and about romance novels. She makes a tech video. The viewership is just astronomical. So a lot of you may know Ollie from that. Some others of you may know him from his own satanic bent on his channel, his satanic 100 book challenge, which was, he says in his own self-defense, made as a challenge mainly for himself, that he's not imposing this on the rest of BookTube. And yet, look at his unholy sway. And the 100 book challenge is pretty simple. Read 100 of the books that you have mindlessly accumulated on your shelves before you buy another book. Before you accumulate anything else, read 100 of the books that you have, which is a pretty merciless challenge, since quite a few people, even on BookTube, often don't rack up 100 reads in one whole year. So Ollie's challenge is basically telling you to sit on your own collection for what could be a very long time. Quite a few of you have taken up that challenge. I don't think, mainly I joke, but mainly not because of CriminOlly's Aleister Crowley type supernatural abilities, but because the challenge for a lot of you does make sense. You just have too many books that are unread on your shelves, and that part of it I can sort of get behind. I have a huge number of books here at Hyde Cottage, far more than I need, considering how many I have on my own e-reading devices. But at least I can say that I've read 98% of them. And a lot of you can't say that. You have books that have been sitting on your shelf staring at you for years sometimes. So I understand the challenge in that regard, and the challenge might be the way that you know CriminOlly. And the other BookTube channel that I want to respond to today needs no introduction. You do not need an introduction to Olive at ABookOlive. She is the queen bee of our little corner of BookTube. She is a big professional, wonderful, involving channel uh, about the omnivorous nature of her reading. She is not a niche reader. She is not a timid reader. She reads a lot of new releases because, in addition to being a booktuber, she is also the go-to standby in-house book reviewer for the legendary old newspaper, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And both Olive and CriminOlly did videos at the beginning of this year on how to read more. They're both vigorous, prolific readers, and they made videos designed to, as a sort of general purpose advice for how to read more. And I love the videos, and I'll leave links to both of them down below, and I wanted to respond to them, even though I don't have much in the way of saying that's different from them, not fundamentally different from them. In 2021, I had a personal best year for reading. I read more books in 2021 than in any previous year of my life. And again, I want to stress, that is only one metric. That is not necessarily, that could still be a bad reading year. The real metric is what you enjoyed. And if I were to split that off and use that as a separate metric, I would have to say that although 2021 was numerically a greater number than any year that I've had previously, it wasn't a standout year for reading. 2018 was a standout year for enjoyment of reading. 2014 was a standout year for me. But 2021, I don't know if it was just the nature of the outside world news creeping into my reading, or if authors were just fatally distracted. They easily could have been. But I figured that number, I'm not going to say the number on this, it's a freakish number. Of course, those of you who are familiar with this channel, or God forbid, know me in real life, will already know it's a freakish number. So there's no reason to dwell on it. It's not particularly believable, except that, again, as the people who know me in my real life can attest, I can elaborately prove that I read these books. You have to keep in mind I do almost nothing else. The analogy that I always draw for people the few people in the world who've heard the number, the analogy I always draw is, okay, imagine yourself as an incredibly active reader, just like you are now. Okay, now imagine that you have been imprisoned for one of the many federal crimes of which I am sure you're guilty. Imagine that you were thrown in prison, and then imagine another thing that's not all that unpredictable, which is that you misbehave in prison and get thrown in solitary confinement. Imagine that all that happened, and you were in solitary confinement. So you have a room a little bit smaller than this one, with a sink and a toilet and 3 square meals a day, but no contact with anyone else and no exercise of any kind except an hour a day. But imagine, let's change your solitary confinement so that in addition to that, you also had access to a limitless library. And on top of that, let's say the experience of being in solitary confinement decreased your need for sleep from 8 or 9 hours to 1 or 2 hours. If that were your hypothetical, it's a lot of moving parts in that hypothetical, but if that were your hypothetical, so you have literally nothing else to do all day and almost all night, and an endless supply of books to do it with, and are an active reader, and all your other needs are met, your numbers would go up. Your number would be as freakish as mine. And that is basically my situation. I'm not meaning to refer to Hyde College as prison. This is a pretty nice prison, if so. But and my roommate, my cellmate, my little schnauzer, is also fairly undemanding. But that is basically my reality, and that's why my number can get so high. But more importantly, that's why I think that I am justified in making a response video. So I want to go through the 2 videos that I'm talking about, and then give some thoughts at the end. So we'll start, of course, with Olive. And she and Ollie, I'm sure, did not connive ahead of time, but their videos break down very similarly. Olive starts out with what to read, then it goes to when to read, and then how you read. And for what you read, she has some wonderful, their whole video is full of wonderfully logical Olive advice. And her advice about what to read is to start where you are and branch out from there. If you're wondering what to read, start from where you are. Start from what you know and branch out from there. In terms of, I don't even know, if you've read, if you're not a big reader and you want to be one, well, if you want to be one, that must mean that some reading pleased you. So find the reading that pleased you and extrapolate out from there in growth rings. You'll find that it's not that hard to do. Olive is entirely right to point out that one of the great bits of grease for that experience to make it easier is to find a good source of book recommendations. Wherever that source is, it doesn't have to be the New York Times book review. It can be any kind of source, provided it aligns with your tastes and enthuses you to read. Olive mentions all sorts of, there are subreddits, there are the Goodreads groups, of course, there are all sorts of places all over the world, all over the internet, all over the real world, devoted to recommending books for you. And Olive also mentions booktubers, like herself, and I am happy to recommend books. The only logistical danger with this channel in me recommending you a book is that I might also send it to you. It's no pressure. It's just I have learned in my life, I have decided, based on what I've learned in my life, that I'm always going to be nagged just a little. If someone tells me, my last 5 reading experiences have been so bad, so boring, so uninteresting, I just wish I could break out of it. I'm not going to feel completely satisfied if all I do in response to that is recommend them a book. The only way I'm going to feel 100% satisfied is if I recommend them a book and then give it to them. So I'm not lending it to them, so there's no pressure, there's no shadow hanging over them, but I know at least that they have it. I have removed every obstacle except them actually reading it. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them read Jonathan Franzen. But in any case, I am also a good source for book recommendations. Just find your good source for book recommendations and work outward from what already makes you comfortable. That's great advice. Then for when to read, Olive mentions that you have to commit time to it. And in the course of this section of her video says a quintessentially Olive sentiment, which I just love because it's completely sensible and cannot be gainsaid. The quote is, "There are no shortcuts here." That is entirely true. That is entirely true. There are no shortcuts here. Although when we get to Ollie's video, you'll see something that almost counts as a shortcut. It doesn't quite, but it almost counts. The key to Olive's point here, I think, if I may be allowed to mansplain it, is that you have to commit time to this thing. If you want it to be a part of your life, you have to make it a part of your life. You can't expect that it will just happen. This is a problem that people have with, I think, just conceptualizing reading at all. That it ought not to be there. It's not clear thinking to equate sufficiency with proficiency. And people do that way too often with reading because everybody can read. What reading, really, really good, limber, active, critical, omnivorous, extremely hungry reading, what that kind of, I won't say good reading because there's no such thing as bad reading, but accomplished reading, that has more in common with proficiency than sufficiency. Way too many readers think that because they can read, there's no gradation of skill or experience involved. And they don't think that. They think that about reading because it's a common thing that everyone can do. They don't think it, for instance, about playing the violin. When it comes to playing the violin, there is an easy way. People find it very easy to distinguish between sufficiency and proficiency. It's easy for them to do that because not everybody can play the violin. Well, that's how reading ought to be thought of. And if that's what you want for yourself, if you want that kind of proficiency, well, you have to set aside time for it. You can't expect it to just happen. It's easy for us to look at reading as this sort of thing that's part of our genetic toolbox. It's not. It's not. It's just you don't remember doing it. You don't remember learning how to do it. And most people, 99.9% of all humans on Earth, absolutely stop at sufficiency. If they ever get to that, they stop at sufficiency. I would argue myself, having been both in academia and also at the front of many, many writing groups, I would argue that most people don't even get to sufficiency in reading, that most people don't. I think anywhere in the world, in any country, if you were to administer a fairly routine reading comprehension test, most people would fail it. The only reason that doesn't seem more self-evident is because of where you are right now. You are in the ecosystem of BookTube, which is mighty bookish. but and that's fine. I mean, that kind of sufficiency is fine. And I might argue, I might also add here that a huge number of literary careers are based on that sufficiency and not on proficiency at all. For every one reader who's willing to dive into the intricacies of Henry James or Edith Wharton, there are 100 readers who are perfectly happy reading airport thrillers. they are still very dedicated readers. They are absolutely real readers, but airport thrillers are written straight to sufficiency in reading. They aren't meant to challenge you at all. And there's nothing wrong with that, but if you want more than that, you're going to have to devote time to it. Absolutely, you're going to have to devote time to it. That's a point that's going to come up in Ollie's video as well. And Olive's third category is how to read. Bit of a touchy subject for some people. I've met quite a few people who want to be more proficient readers who don't like even the insinuation that they don't already know how to read, because they're automatically assuming the raw ability. That's not what anyone is talking about when they say how to read. We're not telling you your vowels and your consonants. But for in Olive's section, what she's talking about is how to do it to improve it for you. And one of the points that she makes right away is remove all your devices. I have argued this for a long time. I will take the opportunity to repeat it now. Not only remove your devices, but right now, go into your devices, all of them, your iPad, your phone, everything, and disable notifications. It's easy to do. Just go into the settings and disable notifications. Don't let your machines talk to you. That will create, as you know already, if you have them on, it creates a Pavlovian response in everyone. It's unavoidable. And that Pavlovian response is disastrous. It's like a bomb going off to your concentration. You might think you're recovering right away, but you're not. You're not. It takes a good solid 15 minutes for you to recover. And how many times do you go 15 minutes without a notification ping? No wonder people attest all over the world to disastrous ability to concentrate, how that is deteriorated over time. Well, part of that is the world digging at you, because the world is in your pocket all the time. But part of it you are enabling by letting your devices talk to you. Disable your notifications. But also, Olive makes the point, put it physically away from you. In order to, as she puts it, treat your reading time as sacred. I agree with that completely. I have noticed in my life that most of the time the world does not like that idea, that most people seem to relish the idea of not taking it seriously. Many readers that I know, dedicated readers like us, I'm sure that a lot of you have stories like this, where you're reading, you're absorbed in the book, you haven't made a peep in an hour, someone in the family or someone in the dorm room or whatever comes by, sees you, and says, "Oh, I thought you were busy," and then just sits down and starts talking, because they don't view it as sacred. That's understandable, but it's wrong. You should treat it that way. You should treat it as sacred. Set the times aside. I have avoided the problem. Once I realized that people were going to do that, I set aside time. I solved the problem. I set aside time when no one's awake. I read at night when no one's awake, so I don't have to worry about it. But that was the gist of Olive's video. I'll leave a link to it down below. It's very much worth your time to watch. I'm sure you've already watched it. But then we go on to CriminOlly, who also did a video on reading. He's also a prolific reader. So and he broke his video down in along the exact same way: when, what, and how. So we'll go through. I want to go through his points because his when to read had some wonderful stuff in it. Because he agrees with Olive in one of her points, which is set aside time. If there's no shortcuts here. If you're gonna make this an important part of your life, then it's going to take its own time, like all the other important parts of your life. And if not, then not. But don't say it. You know, if you're not willing to do that, then don't say that you want it to be an important part of your life. If you're not willing to put time aside for it and give it the serious attention that it's due, then that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But don't say that you do. Ollie makes a great point. There's loads of time you could be reading that you're probably wasting. I can't say that quote in Ollie's own British nasal voice. I watch a ton of British YouTubers and British booktubers at one time or another. The one thing they all have in common is how nasal they sound, but no one sounds like Ollie. He's in a class of his own. It sounds like he has 2 tangerines stuck up his nose. So I can't duplicate that. But the sentiment I wholeheartedly agree with. There's loads of time you could be reading that you're probably wasting. Lately, on social media, the demon has been Wordle. Before that, it was Words with Friends or The Sims. I know plenty of people who come to me and claim they have no time for reading or writing the work they should be writing, doing the freelance work they should be writing, working on the novel they should be doing the revisions on the novel that they should be doing, whatever it is. I know a lot of people who over the years have come to me with that kind of declaration. They get no love at my doorstep, none whatsoever, none at all. In every one of those cases, universally, they are possessed of oceans of wasted time. Oceans. I used to tell them, I used to say, are you inviting me to take a look at the hour by hour way you spend your time? Because you're not going to like the results. You know already that you're lying to me now. You know already that you are. You have tons of time that you just waste. So don't come, that's fine. You can waste it if you want, but don't come to me and tell me that you don't have time to read. Universally, in my experience, the only people who ever come to me and say they wish they had time to read have tons of time to read. Tons. You know, the one thing that dedicated readers who are busy people never say to me? That they don't have time to read. Never. That never happens. Think of my fellow Three Musketeers. Think of Mark Richardson. He's got a wife. He's got half a dozen high maintenance children. he's got a job that takes a lot of his time. He's got standing in his community. Never once have I heard from him, I wish I had more time to read. And you know already, if you watch his channel, he gets reading done. Think of Jason Harrigan. Has a wife, again, half a dozen high maintenance children, something like that. I lose count of how many they are. And also, you know, a proficient profession of his own. You'll never hear him say that he doesn't have time to read. Never. Ollie is entirely right here. You have time to read. Everyone has time to read. Unfortunately, although I completely agree with that comment of Ollie's, he does make a comment in his video that I don't agree with. Naturally, where would it be without a little Steve disagreement? I'll read it. Don't let anyone tell you that listening to an audiobook isn't reading. It is reading. Without any denigration meant here to people who love audiobooks and listen to them, of course it isn't reading. If it were reading, it would be reading. It wouldn't be a different thing if it were the same thing. It's a different thing. That doesn't mean that it's somehow a disgrace at all. But we've had the books versus audiobooks discussion before. The main thing that stops it from being the same as reading is that it's intensely intermediated in a way that reading to yourself is not. That makes it fundamentally different. But that doesn't make it shameful. But the point, the main point about when to read, to get back to the line of Ollie's that I agree with, there's loads of time you could be reading with that you're probably wasting. One point that he makes is that in addition to, he agrees completely with Olive's point that you should set aside time for reading and make it sacred. You know, find the time or declare the time and just wall it off so that either people know not to intrude on you or you're doing it at a time when people won't intrude on you. But in addition to that, Ollie also makes a great point, which is that in addition to setting aside time for reading, there's also tons and tons of time during a given week that you don't set aside that you could use for reading. Those little interstitial moments, the waiting in line, the waiting for, hold to be over on a phone call or something. The waiting, the moving around, those little interstitial moments in Mark or Jason's case, sitting in the car waiting for a kid, waiting for, a class to be over, or a recital to be over, or practice to be over, or something like that. There are many, you know what I'm talking about. There are many, many, many such occasions. And it doesn't take much work to retrain your habits so that when you reach a moment like that, which can sometimes go on for 15 minutes, maybe even longer than that, that when it doesn't take long to retrain yourself so that when you reach that moment, instead of just scrolling through your phone idly, you open a book on your phone or on your tablet or whatever and start reading. It isn't hard to do that. And boy, oh boy, does that get you through books. Ollie's entirely right. That just opens up vast vistas of time. Then he, for what to read, he warmed my heart by saying, read what you enjoy. Obviously, since his whole channel is devoted to just shamelessly, energetically reading what he enjoys. Everyone should. That's what you should do. The only people who don't 100% of the time get to enjoy what they read, to read only what they enjoy, are poor front of the trench foot soldiers like Olive and myself, where occasionally Occasionally an editor wants us to read something that we don't enjoy, even sometimes that we know ahead of time we aren't going to enjoy. Olive's been lucky in that she has, first of all, a great deal of autonomy, and also she's had lots of lucky picks, books that just jumped. That is wonderful. I know what that feeling's like. That's great. I have been less lucky. Part of this comes because I review whatever's put in front of my plate for Kirkus Reviews, and those books usually aren't good. But we're the only that's the only case is if some outside force and a paycheck, a checky poo, is waiting for you. Otherwise, yeah, Ollie's entirely right. I'm sure that Olive would say the same thing. Read what you enjoy. Life's too short. And then the third category, of course, was how to read. Again, just like Olive, Ollie is not talking about the raw mechanics of grammar school. Instead, he's talking about your approach to reading. Now, he has an approach I bet a lot of you will disagree with. He says to read one book at a time. And I know that a lot of you don't do that and swear by it. A lot of you swear by the fact that you need a book going in different places. And that even if it's not in a different place, sometimes the book on your nightstand won't be doing it for you that night. You'll want to switch to something else. And I marvel at the way, just neurologically, that we are able to create these separate card catalog files of all these different books. So that it's very rare when someone is reading, has a number of books on the go in different places. That's something that Mark Richardson does, actually. He has books in different places. So that when he comes to rest, there'll be a book right there, and he won't have to go looking for it. And it's very rare in a situation like that you will pick up that book and just totally blank on where you were. It's very rare, in other words, that the other books you have going will distract you or lessen the reading experience. Ollie seems to think that it does. Maybe it does for him, and maybe it does for a lot of you. I'd love to know. Do you read multiple books at one time or not? Do you have multiple books going at once or not? But those were his basic advices and Olive's. And I thought I would just finish out this video by adding my own, which will be repetitive. If those of you who have had the singular mental misfortune of watching lots and lots of my videos will already have heard a lot of these things. But I have 5 points that I want to make for how to read more, if that's what you want to do. And the number one point, you're going to see it coming, those of you who've watched this channel, is don't subvocalize. Don't sound out the words in your head as you're reading silently. Don't hamper your reading experience like that. You can read words with your eyes and the word deciphering parts of your brain 2 or 3 times faster than you can read words out loud. It's a totally different part of the brain. It's a more laborious process, of course, because you're signaling to your brain that you intend to make speech. Now, even if you're reading silently, if you are subvocalizing, you are still signaling to your brain that you want to make speech. That is a more laborious process. If you want to read more books, if you're happy the way you are, that's just fine. Some of you go whole hog. I firmly believe that's the source of the popularity of audiobooks, which are the quintessence of subvocalizing. You're actually vocalizing. You're sticking to the speed at which the words can be said, or you're speeding them up, which is even worse. I don't know how, personally, I don't know how people can enjoy audiobooks. And even there, if I were to stretch my imagination, I could maybe sort of see it, but how people enjoy audiobooks at 2 or even 3 times speed, that I do not understand. That just seems to me to be boredom, an expression of boredom, which to me is the opposite of what reading is. but the point that I always make about subvocalizing is that you don't have to do it. It's not necessary. You might feel like you have no choice if you try to stop, but I want to stress that's only because it's an ingrained habit. You've been doing it your whole life. It's going to take a while to uproot that habit and get rid of it. You can do it. As an adult, you can do it. You can uproot that habit. And you might want to try it and see what it does. You will find one thing for sure. Many people have told me that when they try at first to stop subvocalizing, they can't remember anything that they're reading. That is understandable. It is a brand new habit. That is understandable. But if you try to stop yourself from doing that and succeed, you will notice right away that the speed of your reading catapults. That's absolutely understandable. Your ability to read visually is much faster than your ability to read vocally. So that'd be my piece of advice number one. If you want, my first piece of advice would be stop subvocalizing. Then number two is the same thing as Olive and Ollie say, which is no distractions. Don't read distracted. No TV, no music, no uh, notifications on your phone. Put your phone away. Your phone, your tablet, they are the enemy of reading. Reading should be you and the book, not anything else. Although, I mean, when I'm reading a book critically, when I'm reading a book for review, I will often not do that. I will often read connected to the outside world so that I can immediately check and then footnote a fact, check and then footnote a quotation. But I would argue that that's the product of a lot of practice. So it does not decrease my enjoyment of what I'm reading at all. I would hope that even people who don't like me, having watched this channel, would say, yeah, this guy doesn't have any problem with his enjoyment of his reading. I would hope that would be true. But for you, if you're not engaged to review something, I would say isolate yourself with the book. Set it aside and remove all distractions. I think that is one of the large appeals of dedicated e-readers. We were talking just the other day about Nooks and Kindles. I think regardless of the form factor, what you like or don't like, I think that's a reason for their popularity is that they isolate you with the book. They aren't able to browse the internet. Then my point number three would be, again, to echo Olive and Ollie and say, make the time. Ollie's point about finding those little pockets of time that exist in your day and filling them with reading is a very good point. That is absolutely true. It will work. But you also have to make the time. You also have to set aside time that is for reading. I know that you can do it. I know that there's a window somewhere where you can do that. And I think you will find that once, if it's the problem is other people, as it so often is, I think you will find that once you make it clear that this time is for reading, you'll get the respect that time deserves. You might even get some imitators, which is always great. Then my point number four, for how to read more, but also how to read more enjoyably, get more out of your reading experience, is to engage with what you're reading, which means take notes, pull out excerpts to put in a commonplace book, as Sam the teacher would say. To make a commonplace book of reading, put quotes in your journal, that sort of thing. Make notes, make marginalia, engage with it, take it on board as part of you. One of the side effects of that, or maybe one of the presuppositions of that particular piece of advice of mine, is that won't work with the kind of reading that I was talking about that is merely sufficient. There isn't enough there. No one annotates James Patterson. They might enjoy him, and God bless them if they do, and God bless him for writing books they will consistently enjoy. But the more you engage with the work, the more meat you're going to want on the bones. And I would argue, just from a personal standpoint, that the more meat on the bones of what you're reading, the more you're going to enjoy it. So my next piece of advice would be to engage with what you're reading. And then the final piece of advice is the same as Ollie and Olive, with the added emphasis. My final piece of advice would be, again, yes, read what you want, but stay adventurous. Always be willing to try new things, rather than, I only like this one thing, I'm only going to read this one thing. Of all of the problems that I have with the adult fetishization of YA fiction, for instance, that used to be all of BookTube and that is still all of Goodreads, of all of the problems that I have with that, and I have many problems with that, the number one problem I had with it when it was totally ascendant on BookTube, of course, it's not anymore. Thank God, it's not totally ascendant on BookTube anymore. Now, BookTube is starting to come to reflect the complexity and difference of the reading world just in general. But the number one problem I had with it was that kind of walled-in complacency. Well, I only read this. Usually said by bourbon binging 30-year-old adults. They would say, I only read YA. Some booktubers that I saw, that I've watched over the years, have gone even so far as to say, well, I've read only YA for so long that I can't read anything else. I tried to read a contemporary work of fiction for adults, or, God help us, Dickens, and I couldn't do it. Well, yeah, that's the price you'll pay if you weaken your muscles to atrophy. That's the price you'll pay. And the main gist of that disapproval is that it's so incurious. It's so timid. Don't be a timid reader. Always try new things. You never know when you might find your new favorite genre, a new favorite author. Always try new things. So the first part of the advice, very much the same as Olive and Ollie. Read what you want. But I think they would both agree with me. Try new things. Read adventurously. You don't know. Maybe you'll end up wanting to read what you experiment with. But anyway, that is a typically long responsibility of mine. I thought we'd just kick around the subject a bit. Of course, I would love to hear from all of you. I've had many emails on the subject of what, when, and where, and how to read from all of you over the years. But there are always new people. I'd be happy to hear more. Feel free to sound off in the comments or email me. I would love to know where your take is on all of these things. On what you read, on how you read, and on when you read. But I thought I couldn't resist the subject because reading is such a huge part of what I do every day. So I'm going to wrap this up for now before the sunlight hitting my unprotected books drives the preservationists in the audience insane. I will stop tormenting them with that sight. And I will also, just for your peace of mind, I will close the drape so that the sunlight is not hitting the books anymore. I just wanted more ambient light. That's all. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.